Hey, I'm Max and welcome to the part 2 of this tutorial. In this one I'm going to show you how to add names to enemies and also leaderboards so you can see how you're doing compared to them. So let's get right into it. The first step is to go into the virus class, at least for my game, and to add a variable for the name. So public string player name. Then we also need a list of names that we're going to randomly pick from. So for this I'm going to go in my game object. I will add a public static list of string names equals to new list of string. And in the start function, I'm going to add to my name. To do this, you can simply type the name of your list, then add range, new string array, and then type all of your names in a string array with a comma between them. So I will just add a bunch of them. Okay, so some of the names are questionable, but whatever, you put whatever names you want. Also, I don't have enough names for many AIs, but obviously if you have something like 20 enemies in your game, you should have at least like 200 names to make sure that every game you get different names. Now that you have your name list, you can simply go back in your player class, or in my case the virus script, and do in the start function int name index equals to random.range. So we will pick a random index for the name from 0 to game.names.count. So basically this will pick an index randomly in the list of names. Then we can simply set our player name to the game.names at the name index. So we set our name to whichever one we randomly picked. And then if you want to make sure that no two AIs have the same name in the same game, you can do game.names.remove at and then remove the name index. So this will remove it from the list after we pick it once to make sure that there aren't two enemies with the same name. However, if you do this, make sure that your list of name has at least enough names for the amount of enemies that you will spawn. So for example, here I have something like 20 names. If I want to spawn 50 enemies, that will not work. So in my case, because I don't have enough names and I don't want to spam a bunch of names, I'm going to remove this line, but make sure to keep it if you don't want two enemies with the same name. So now if we hit play and we take a look at the scene, if we click on one of our enemy and look into the script, we can see the random names. So this one is Audad, this one is Epic Max, this one is Epic Gamer, this one is Bob, and you can see that they each have a more or less random name. You might have another one that's called Bob because I have more enemies than names. But you can see they all have a name now, but when we play in game, there's nothing displaying the name. Also, you might get that error here in the console, and that happens because we try to get our name in the start, but we also add the list of names in our start function on our game script. And because the order of the start is not necessarily always the same, you might get that error sometimes. So to fix this, you might just want to add a default value to your list. So to add a default value to your list, you can simply open the brackets after your list and then put all of your names into those brackets just like we did on start. And now that we set it at the top, we don't need to set it on start again. However, keep in mind that this is static, so when we restart the scene, it's going to stay the same. So if you remove a name from the list, like we did here in the comments, if we remove a name that we already used, then when we restart the game, this name will not come back. Which means if I remove this here and I uncomment this, when I use a name in a game, then if the game restarts, that name will not be back. So this might be something that you want to do if you want to make sure that the same name is not used for multiple games in a row. However, in my case, I want to make sure that all of the names are back every game. So you can simply copy and paste this. And in the game over, before reloading the scene, you can simply do names.clear to remove all of the names left. And then names.addRange, new string array, and then you put them in the brackets just like we did on start before. So basically just move the add range from start to game over if you want to reuse the same names for multiple games in a row. And also put the default value so that when you first launch, your players can access the names. So just a little recap, this is the default values. This is if you want to allow the same name to be in multiple games in a row. So the same fake player can be in multiple games in a row. And this is if you want to make sure that there is no two enemies with the same name in the same game at the same time. So this should be there, but in my case, since I don't have enough names, I'm not putting it. And this is up to you. So hopefully that is clear, and now there should no longer be any errors. Now we need to do something to display the player's name and all of the other fake players' names too. So I'll right click on my player, go in 3D object and then text Mesh Pro. Then click import. And what this will allow us to do is display a text in the scene. So now we have our text here. Now we can move it up a little bit. So just like this, move it up above the player. Then obviously we want to remove the default text. Then here you can mess with settings like the font size. I might reduce it a little bit just to make sure it fits. And also the centering, put it centered on both axes. You might also want to add a outline to make it a little bit cooler. And maybe some dilate. So set it up however you want. And you can see here my text kind of goes behind the player or the viruses here. So if you want to make sure that it is always seen even above enemies, go in extra settings below the text mesh and set the ordering layer to something like 10 to make sure it's always above everything else. Now we can open up our enemy prefab and do the same thing. So enemy, 3D object, text mesh pro. I'm going to move it up a little bit. Reduce the font to 28, set it to centered, and also add the ordering layer 10. Finally, the last thing we need is to give our script this text so it can set it to the name. So let's go back in our virus script, add a public text mesh pro, but you can see it's not here because we need to do using TM Pro. Now that we did using TM Pro, it should pop up, text mesh pro. And make sure to not pick the UGUI option, the Text Mesh Pro alone. The UGUI option is for the Text Mesh Pro on the canvas, but the one we use is the one in the world. And then we can name it whatever, name text. And on start, when we set the name, we can simply do name text.text equals to the player name. Then you could either do get component in children, Text Mesh Pro, or you can simply drag the Text Mesh Pro into your script. I think that's way easier. And also for the player, so let's see the player at the bottom, Text Mesh Pro, drag it in, and let's see if that works. Okay, so apparently my player is named Wow, and this one is named Real Human and Cool Guy. Oh, you can see there's two with the same names because I didn't put that line. So the names might be a bit big, maybe I'll put them a bit smaller. So I think 20 font size is gonna be okay for me, so I'll go in my player and enemy. Font size 20, I think that's okay. So now you can see your name and the name of all the other enemies. That's pretty good. So now the player gets a random name, but you probably don't want that. To let the player pick its name, I'm going to add a menu. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that menu because it's just a tutorial, but you can make it look however you want, obviously. So I'm going to right click, go in UI and then add a panel. This will add a canvas and a panel. So then I can simply click on my panel and hit F, which will zoom on it. Now this panel, I'm going to make it a bit darker. Then on my panel, I'm going to add a text with Text Mesh Pro. I'm going to type in the text, type your name. Obviously you put whatever you want. And I'm going to put it at the top with the anchor, let's say -50, 0. Now I'm going to add a UI and then input field. So this will be where the player inputs his name. And finally a UI button. So this button here will select the name and then start the game. So I'll put it at the bottom at, let's say, 150. And I'll set the text on it to start game. Okay, so now I'll create a script for the menu. So C# script, I'll just call it menu. Then in the menu script on the start, I'll do time.timescale equals to 0. So this will freeze the game. And this is just to make sure that the game doesn't start in the background while you're picking your name. Then I will add at the top using TM Pro again, so we can get our text. Then I will add a variable so we can get our input fields value. So public TMP underscore input field. And I will also add a function for the button. So when we click on it, we will call this function, so start game. which will set back the time.timescale to 1. And it will also close the menu. So in my case, I will not use the menu for anything else. So I will just destroy the game object, which will be the panel, because I will put this script on the panel. But if you want to reuse it in the same scene, you can just hide it. And I will also set the player's name. So I will find object of type player controller. So this will give us the player dot game object dot get component virus. So we can get the virus script on the player. And then dot player name equals to our input field dot text, which will be the text that we input in. So now if I save this and I go back on my panel, I should be able to add this script. So on my panel, add the script menu, then drag in the input field. So now when I start the game, this menu should pop up. The game is frozen in the background and I get this error in the console. This error in the console is because we are using the new input system. So we just have to go on event system and hit replace with input system. So now it should no longer pop up as an error. Now we should be able to enter our player's name. So I will just call myself test to make sure it works and hit start game. And I forgot to put in the function for start game. So on button, we want to add on click, drag in our panel, then go in menu and choose start game. So this will call our start game function when we hit start game. So now I will call myself test to make sure it works, start game. And you can see it did not work because we set the text on top of our player on start, which happens before we hit start game. So in our virus script, we can simply add a public void change name with a string new name. Then we can set our player name to that new name. And we can also set back our name text equals to that player name. So now in our menu, we can do, instead of player name equals, we can do change name and set it to our input field dot text. So this will change our name and also reset back the text above the player. While I'm here, I might as well also add that if the input field is empty, this will give you an empty name. So basically no name above the head. Now you might want that or you might not want that. If you don't, you can put above start game if input field dot text dot length is less than 1, then return. So basically you need at least one letter before you can start the game. So now if I try to start the game with no name, you can see it doesn't work. But if I put in here test start game, you can see now I have the name test. So the player can choose his name and the enemies have random names. That's pretty cool here. I'm chasing myself. I'm gonna eat myself. And there you go. Oh, there's another one of me. Now the last thing we need to do is the leaderboards. Okay, so for the leaderboards, we will create a new script and obviously call it leaderboard. Now in the leaderboard script, we will once again do using TM Pro. And this time we will add a public text mesh pro UGUI array. And this will basically be all of the rows of the leaderboards. Now I will update the leaderboard on update, so once per frame, which is not optimal. If you really wanted to optimize this, you could only update the leaderboard when one of the players gain mass. If no player gained or lost mass in that frame, there is no point updating the leaderboards. So anyway, on update, I'm going to create a list of viruses, which will be the viruses in order of mass. So just equals to a new list by default. Then I'll do for each cell in game.cells if the cell.cell type equals to cell type.virus. So if it is a virus, then I want to do viruses.add cast to a virus the cell. So usually casting to a virus like this is not very safe. You're better doing get component. But as long as all of our cell type variables are okay, then everything in here should be a virus. So casting like this should be safe. Then we want to sort this list according to the mass of each. So the highest mass at the top and the lowest mass at the bottom. There are multiple ways to do this, but the simplest way is simply to use the sort function of the list class. So for this, we just have to go in our virus class and add a public int compare to, and then compare to another virus, so other virus. In here we will simply return mass minus other virus dot mass, or actually it might be the opposite, I'm not exactly sure. And you can simply cast this to an int. So basically this will tell the sort function whether this one is greater than the other one. And then in the leaderboard script we can simply do viruses.sort, and this should use the function that we just made. Or actually, now that I think about it, it's actually other virus.mass minus our mass, otherwise it's going to put the lowest one first. And also to activate this compare to function, we need to add as a parent class iComparable and then add the virus in the brackets. Now this will create an error for the random here because it doesn't know which random we want to use. So you can simply add at the top using random equals unityengine.random. So basically on update we get all of the viruses, then we sort the list using the iComparable, which will use the compare to, which will compare the masses and sort the list. Then we can print the first one to have the highest mass first. So then I'm going to go on my canvas, create a empty game object, call it leaderboards, and add onto it the leaderboard script. And now we can see in the console when I gain mass, it goes up because I'm the one with the highest mass right now. So if I pick one up, it should go up a lot, and 115. So I just need to add a bunch of rows and display, let's say, the top 10. So for this, I'm going to go on my leaderboard, add a UI, Text Mesh Pro, then I will add it to the top right with a pos X of, let's say, -10 and a pos Y of, let's say, -20. For the leaderboards, I'm going to spread it over the whole screen and set it to 0, 0, 0, and 0. So basically this is just to make sure that the leaderboard always stays in the top right. So this is over the whole screen, and then the text is in the top right. Pivot of 1 and 1. I will make it a bit larger, like this is good, and a bit smaller. I will also align to the right to make sure it's next to the edge of the screen. Maybe reduce a little bit the height, 30, yeah, that's good. And then I can simply copy and paste this or duplicate it a couple times. So I'll show, let's say, the top 6, and I'll simply decrease the pos Y for each by, let's say, 50. So this one will be -80. So like this, I have my 6 rows. Then I'm going to go on my leaderboard script, add 6 rows, and simply drag them in. So now our script will have access to all of those rows, and I simply have to set them in the script. So now I will do for int I equals 0, I is smaller than rows.length, I++. Then for the rows at position I, dot text, I'm going to set it to viruses at position I, dot player name, plus, and then let's say a colon, plus viruses at position I, dot mass. So this will show the name and then the mass. Okay, so you can see in the top right there are 6 names, and you can see the mass of each. You can see test is me with 165, so you can see me grow too. So now my number is going up, and if I go in a white cell, my number goes down. That's cool. There might be a little bit too many decimals, so you could either make it straight up a int, so a flat number, or if you want to keep, let's say, 1 or 2 decimal, you could cast to an int the mass, let's say, times 10, like this, and then cast this again to a float and do divided by 10. Or if you want to just have the numbers, you can just do int mass like this, and it will give you the flat number. If you want to display 2 decimal, just do times 100 and then divided by 100. So like this, you can see only 1 decimal. So that's pretty good. Obviously, you can change the look of the leaderboard. You can add a panel behind it, a picture behind it. You can change the color of the names, whatever you want. But you can see now every enemy has a name. And there's a cool leaderboard showing us who is in lead. And also, when I eat one, it should disappear from the leaderboard. Let's try it, and it just disappeared. Okay, that's good. Amazing. Now we can see an error in the console, in the leaderboard 24, so here. And that's simply because we loop for the amount of rows that we have, so 6 in my case, and then we get the virus at that position. But when you get to the end of the game, there aren't 6 viruses anymore. so that doesn't work. So here we can simply do if viruses.count is greater than the I. If so, then we want to add the virus to the leaderboard as usual. Else we could do something like rows I.text equals to none. Or you could delete the row or hide the row or whatever you want. So like this, we should no longer have any errors. And now as they eat each other, we should have less than 6 enemies. So it should start displaying none and none, none. If we pick another one, none again. So now we're 3 and there are 3 on the leaderboards. If I eat this one, it should now be just me and Max. And then if I eat Max, now I win and the leaderboards reset. So you can put the name that you want in the field, have that name. Enemies have random names. They have natural AI that makes them run away or chase enemies. So you can see this one is running away. And we have the leaderboards that show the top players in the game currently. So I think this is a pretty good base for pretty much any fake multiplayer game to have natural AIs, a leaderboard, and names. Hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe.